On March 1, 1854, a steamship left Liverpool bound for Philadelphia. Her name was City of Glasgow. She carried 480 people, men traveling for work, families hopping to start new lives, passengers who had packed belongings for a journey across the Atlantic, and a crew that knew these waters. Then something happened. Because the City of Glasgow never reached Philadelphia, no confirmed distress message, no surviving passenger, no confirmed wreck, no final position. Weeks passed, then months. Ships searched the Atlantic. Reports began appearing about wreckage and possible sightings. But every clue seemed to disappear as quickly as it appeared. And eventually, the question became almost impossible to answer. What happened to 480 people aboard a modern steamship without leaving a confirmed trace? To understand why the disappearance became such a mystery, we have to go back 4 years. In 1850, the City of Glasgow was launched in Glasgow by the shipbuilders Todd and MacGregor. She was an iron-hulled steamship, around 227 feet long, powered by engines driving a single propeller. For the rapidly developing Atlantic passenger trade, this was the future. Steam meant ships no longer had to depend entirely on wind. The City of Glasgow became an important vessel in the emerging Inman service, and she had already completed years of Atlantic crossings before her final voyage. After a refit in 1852, she could carry hundreds of steerage passengers. That detail matters, because the ship wasn't carrying only wealthy travelers. She was part of a growing system moving ordinary people across the Atlantic toward new lives. By March 1854, the City of Glasgow had experience. She wasn't a mystery ship. She wasn't making her first crossing. She was an established Atlantic steamer. And on March 1st, she departed Liverpool. On board were 111 cabin and saloon passengers, 293 steerage passengers, and 76 crew, total 480 people. Nobody watching her leave the harbor could know that they were seeing the beginning of her final voyage. At first, there was no reason to believe anything had gone catastrophically wrong. The ship had sailed. The route was familiar. But then the Atlantic began to reveal a problem. Other vessels were encountering unusually large quantities of ice. The city of Manchester, which was traveling in the same general Atlantic system, reported encountering significant ice fields. Contemporary reports described the ice as unusually extensive for that time of year. That changed the picture. Because the City of Glasgow was now entering an ocean where enormous pieces of ice could appear far south of their expected positions. And the ship had another vulnerability. She was a single-screw steamer. If the propeller or machinery became damaged, the ship could potentially become heavily dependent on her sails. That possibility was discussed at the time. One contemporary account suggested that the City of Glasgow might have encountered ice, suffered damage to her propeller, and attempted to continue under sail toward another port. It was only a theory, but it showed how little anyone actually knew. Then came the waiting. The ship should have arrived, but she didn't. Here's where the mystery becomes stranger. If the City of Glasgow had simply sunk in a major disaster, you might expect evidence: a wreck, debris, lifeboats, bodies, a survivor, a confirmed sighting. Instead, there was almost nothing, and then reports began appearing. One report described a large steamer apparently damaged and heading toward the Azores. For a moment, people thought the mystery might finally have an answer, but the report turned out to be unreliable. Another vessel was later mistaken for the missing ship. Again, it wasn't the City of Glasgow. The confusion continued. Then came another disturbing report. A large iron hull was found. Some believed it might belong to the missing steamer. But again, identification pointed elsewhere. The clues weren't solving the mystery, they were multiplying it. And each false sighting made the real disappearance harder to understand. The ship had become a moving target in people's imagination. Everyone had a theory. Nobody had proof. As the weeks passed, concern turned into certainty. The city of Glasgow was overdue. Her owners had initially hoped she had simply been delayed by ice. The ship had reportedly carried substantial supplies of coal, water, and provisions. But there was a limit to how long those explanations could survive. Eventually, the possibility that she had been lost became unavoidable. And then came one of the most painful aspects of the mystery. The people waiting for her weren't waiting for an abstract ship. They were waiting for people, families, spouses, children, parents. In Philadelphia, people expected passengers to arrive. Mail and information normally followed predictable patterns, but the city of Glasgow never appeared. No passenger stepped onto the dock. No captain walked ashore. No crew member explained the voyage. The ship simply stopped producing evidence. And that is one of the defining features of this mystery. The disappearance wasn't witnessed. There was no known moment when somebody saw the ship sink. History doesn't even give us a confirmed final location, only the space where she should have been. The most widely accepted explanation is also the simplest: ice. The evidence supporting it is real. Other ships reported unusually heavy ice in the Atlantic. The city of Glasgow was traveling during that dangerous seasonal period, and an iron-hulled steamer could still suffer catastrophic damage in a collision. Imagine the scene: night, cold water, limited visibility, an iceberg appearing ahead. The ship changes course, or perhaps the ice is hidden in darkness. The impact comes before there is enough time to react. If the hull is breached badly enough, the Atlantic doesn't need much time. And if the ship sinks far from major shipping lanes, survivors could face freezing water with little chance of rescue. But there is a problem. There is no confirmed wreck proving this happened. So ice remains a strong explanation, but not a demonstrated one. Another possibility is mechanical failure. The city of Glasgow depended on a relatively early steam propulsion system. Her engines drove a single propeller. A major mechanical failure could leave the ship severely compromised. If propulsion was lost in heavy Atlantic weather, the crew might have been forced to rely on sails. That could explain why contemporary speculation imagined the ship attempting to reach the Azores or another refuge. But again, this is where evidence ends and reconstruction begins. We don't have a final log entry. We don't have a survivor. We don't have an official wreck. We don't know whether the engines failed, and we don't know whether the ship remained under power until the end. Then there is the ocean itself. The Atlantic in March was unforgiving. Heavy seas, cold water, strong winds, ice. A ship didn't need to encounter one catastrophic event. Several smaller problems could combine: mechanical trouble, rough weather, damage, water entering the hull, loss of propulsion. And suddenly, a ship that had survived previous voyages could become impossible to save. This is important because disasters at sea don't always have one dramatic cause. Sometimes the final event is the last link in a chain. But again, we cannot prove the chain. And this is what makes the city of Glasgow different from many other famous ship mysteries. The mystery isn't that investigators found something impossible. It's that they found almost nothing at all. There were reports, there were rumors, there were possible sightings. There were pieces of wreckage that seemed promising, but none could be conclusively connected to the missing ship. At one point, a section of wreckage bearing the name City of Glasgow was reportedly found ashore near Campbelltown. It sounded like the breakthrough everyone had been waiting for. But there was a problem. Another vessel carrying the same name existed. The identification could not conclusively establish that the wreckage belonged to the missing 1850 steamship, and so even the physical clue dissolved into uncertainty. Think about what that means. A ship carrying 480 people disappeared. The Atlantic had swallowed the voyage, and even the debris that seemed to carry her name could not give historians a secure answer. The strongest historical explanation remains an accident at sea. most plausibly involving the unusually heavy ice reported along the Atlantic route. The Liverpool Nautical Research Society notes that no clue to the ship's fate was ever discovered, while the general opinion became that she may have collided with an iceberg. But we should be careful with the word likely. Likely does not mean proven. There is a difference between reconstructing a plausible disaster and knowing what actually happened. The city of Glasgow could have been destroyed by ice. She could have suffered mechanical failure. She could have encountered severe weather. Or several of these factors could have combined. What we don't have is the final piece of evidence, the wreck, the log, the survivor, the last message. For the people aboard the city of Glasgow, there was no final chapter, no confirmed last sighting, no known burial place, no wreck that can confidently be pointed to and said, there. That's where it ended, only a departure. A voyage across the Atlantic. And then Silence 480 people entered history on March 1st, 1854, but somewhere between Liverpool and Philadelphia, their story disappears beneath the ocean. Perhaps one day the wreck will be found. Perhaps modern technology will finally reveal where the city of Glasgow came to rest. Until then, the Atlantic keeps the final answer. What really happened to the city of Glasgow?